Today I want to talk about real estate, the stock market, Christianity, or should I say greed. The question is can you take part in these things? Is it a Christian thing to do? Today, people have things, and when they're selling it, they want to get the most that they can for it. That's just what everybody does. That's a cultural thing for us. But that is not the culture of Christ. That is not what God wanted us to do, and we can see that through the Jewish economy. Now, I want to talk about uh, real estate. For myself, years ago, the second home that I had, even my first home that I had, I sold. And you always want as much as you can get for it. You're like, nobody really wants to sell it for, a medium price. If you could sell it for a low price, or a fair price, or a high price, what would you sell it for? Well, everybody might say, well, a fair price. Nobody's going to say that. Everybody's going to say, I want to get the most that I can for it. That is just something that is innate in us. This is why Jesus needs to come into our hearts and into our lives, because that's that sin, that's that selfishness, right? If I can get the most for it, even if it's from a poor person, right? You're like, they're going to stretch it. It could cause them a divorce. It could cause all kinds of things. But we just want that little bit of extra money. We don't want to sell it for a fair price. People will go into homes and they'll be like, oh, I'd have a hard time selling my home like this. If I paint it and I do these different things and do all this cosmetic stuff and make it look nice, I can get so much more for it than I could if I did it the other way. So you'll put in a little bit of money, get a whole lot more for it. So it's kind of like a guy that, he sees a girl and she's covered with makeup and she's like, wow, she's really good looking. And then he sees her without makeup and you're like, who are you? You don't even recognize her. Now, it's obviously not that dramatic with a woman, but with a house, it is. It can be that dramatic because people will cover up things and they'll hide things that are there that they don't want people to see. All those cracks in the walls, well, the paint filled that in nice. And different things like that. When you do this cosmetic stuff, it covers the age of the house or the true quality of the house. And then you still want to see, and you're doing it not to just get a fair price, you're doing it to get more than what you could before. Because if you put in that amount of work and you only got the amount of money out of it as what you put into it, you would not do it. You would let the person who bought the house do it. So you're putting it in to make more. When I put my second house, the house that I built on the market, I sold it for a little bit more than what I built it for. I built it, and it was my dad, myself, my grandfather, and my uncle. And we built it together. I paid my uncle some, I paid my dad a little bit. Probably could have paid him more, but he didn't really want any more. And then I didn't pay my grandfather, he just wanted to come and help out. And then when I sold my house, I might have made a little bit of money off of it compared to what I built it for, but not a lot. But if I would have put it on the market about 6 months before, I would have got 1/5 more for it than what I did when I sold it. Now, that's pretty amazing. And I would always say, well, it kind of always works out in the end, because if you sell your house and you're buying a new house, well, your house value went up, that house value went up. But if you sell your house and you don't buy a house, you just lose. So this is not a fair system. This is the imaginary money game that runs our country. And while we might look at the government and blame the government for it, we can see that the house market and the inflation of the housing market is due to people and wanting to get more for it than just a fair price. So we can't blame the government for that. They try to regulate it some, but it's a losing battle because everybody in the government's doing the same thing that each individual person is doing as well. So that's something we need to look at. We need to not always cast the blame on other people, but we need to look to self. Am I doing my part for society? Am I making the poor poorer? And am I making the rich richer? Am I becoming rich or am I becoming poor? And why is that? What is going on? Something that we should realize is the Jewish economy is beautiful. God set up an economical system in the Bible, and that explains many things that would help the world dramatically. Now, the Bible tells us it's not going to be accepted, plain and simple. But if we look at that, we can see things that are beautiful there, and that would make things a whole lot easier for poorer people and be sustainable. In Proverbs 11 verse 1 it says, A false balance is an abomination to the Lord, but a just weight is his delight. So think about that. It said that it was an abomination, a false balance. So if you're trying to sell your house for more than what it's worth, is that a false weight? Is that an abomination that God's talking about? Just think about, why does Jesus need to come again the second time? He's coming because if he doesn't come, there will not be a Christian left on earth. So he's coming just to get the few, very, very few people that are going to be left on earth, because there's going to be no one else. And if he didn't come soon, there would not be a Christian left on earth at all. So think about that. Am I doing something that's more abominable? Can I actually sell it for less? Do I have to do what my real estate agent says, where they say, you can, this is the market value, and you say, this is what my house is worth? It's not an easy thing. Most people wouldn't know what their house is actually worth. But my last house that I had in Ontario, what I put into that house is what I actually sold it for, and I sold it to a friend to help them out, and I sold it for what I put into it, and I didn't really make anything off of it. I didn't make anything off it. I pretty much sold it. It was kind of one of those nip-tuck things, and it would have been very, very close. So when I talk about the Jewish economy, we need to realize a few things that the Jewish economy has. It's beautiful. No interest to your brethren, right? So if you're a believer, you don't charge any other believers interest. Now, they were allowed to charge people of the world interest, people that weren't following God, but they weren't to charge anybody within in their group or society. God wanted the whole world to be part of this system. He didn't want anybody segregated. And we got to remember that. So it's like, hey, I'd like to have something here, both money and no interest. And it's like, well, if you're a Christian, oh, no interest? This is a real drawing point, that no interest. Something else that's really neat that keeps God's like, hey, I'm keeping the housing prices rock bottom because the poor people need a place to live, and I'm going to make it so that nobody's going to sell their houses for extraordinary amounts. And you know why? Because after 50 years, that house has to go back to that person, right? Whenever the Jubilee came, so it's not just 50 years, if the Jubilee was coming, all the lands had to go back to that person. The people that sold their homes or sold their lands were also able to buy back their homes or the lands for the same price that they bought it for. There wasn't an inflation there, and they could buy it back at any time that they had sold it. So God is like, hey, you know what? Let's just keep the house prices just the way it is. It's not going to be so much that nobody can afford it. Today, how many people can afford homes? How many people they're slaves to the banks is really what we are. And now let's go to the stock market. Stock market, how does that work? That really affects the economy. It affects inflation. It affects all different kinds of things. And I'm just going to put it simply. The stock market is just civilized gambling. That's all it is. And somebody be like, hey, well, I'm a Christian. I put my money into stocks. They're low risk. Did you get that word? Low risk. It's gambling. It's all gambling. It doesn't matter what it is. And that gambling, while you're like, oh, I'm always making money on that. Well, you're not, because while you are making money on that, some company has already raised their prices of something, so they're making more money there. Therefore, you're just paying it all in the end. Because the stock market is the way it is, everybody's putting into it to try to make money for nothing. That's essentially the only reason for it, right? You put money in, you're trying to make money without doing anything. Without doing anything that's of any value, like, physical value. I've always said that hardest working people are usually the ones that make the least amount of money. And I'm talking about like physical work. It's the hard, you can go to McDonald's and you can go to all these places and you watch how they work, and they work hard, they work fast, and they get paid less than a living wage. And then can you imagine if these people are divorced and then they're paying like not quite half their income, but pretty close to it, to somebody else. So they're not even making a living wage. Like here in BC, a living wage was $20 an hour. Minimum wage was $15 an hour. I don't know what it is now. So you're making $5 an hour less than a minimum wage, and then you lose almost half of that money to begin with. How do people survive? This world is not getting any better, and there's real problems with it. It's my prayer that people will look and study the Jewish economy and know for themselves that God is right, He is just, and that this world can be helped, but it's due to greed of people and ourselves. And we have to realize this. And I'm not exempt from this. When I sold my house, I wanted to get as much as I could. I was so hoping I'd get that larger amount of money. But now that I look back and I reflect, and I've been studying my Bible, and I look at the laws through the Bible and how they are, God had it so that these things didn't happen. That people could live a good life here on this earth, that you could actually have heaven on earth. It's my prayer that you look at these things and think about that. Am I contributing to this? What is my real estate agent going to say if I'm selling my home and I'm like, this is what my house is worth? This is what I want to sell it for? And I'm looking for somebody poor to buy it. Can you imagine what would your real estate agent say? He's going to be like, either that person's nuts or that person really truly believes in God. We should come to realize that it's not just the letter of the law that God wants us to know. He wants us to understand the principles that make them there. In Proverbs 11 verse 1 it says, "A false balance is an abomination to the Lord, but a just weight is his delight." This should be in all our transactions and everything we do. This balance does not just mean money, but it means weighing everything in life.